Bright Íarindéil was then lord of the people that dwelt nigh to Sirion's mouths. And he took to wife Elwing the fair, and she bore to him Elrond and Elros, who are called the Half-Elven. Yet Íarindéil could not rest, and his voyages about the shores of the hitherlands eased not his unquiet. Two purposes grew in his heart, blended as one in longing for the wide sea. He sought to sail thereon, seeking after Tuor and Idril, who returned not. And he thought to find, perhaps, the last shore, and bring, ere he died, the message of elves and men to the Valar in the west, that should move their hearts to pity for the sorrows of Middle-earth. Now Íarindéil became fast in friendship with Círdan the shipwright, who dwelt on the Isle of Balar with those of his people who escaped from the sack of the havens of Brithombar and Eglarest. With the aid of Círdan, Íarindéil built Vingilot the foam-flower, fairest of the ships of song. Golden were its oars and white its timbers, hewn in the birchwoods of Nimbrethil, and its sails were as the argent moon. Yet Íarindéil saw now no hope left in the lands of Middle-earth, and he turned again in despair, and came not home, but sought back once more to Valinor with Elwing at his side. He stood now most often at the prow of Vingilot, and the Silmaril was bound upon his brow, and ever its light grew greater as they drew into the west. And the wise have said that it was by reason of the power of that holy jewel that they came in time to waters that no vessels save those of the Teleri had known. And they came to the enchanted isles, and escaped their enchantment. And they came into the shadowy seas, and passed their shadows. And they looked upon Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle, but tarried not. And at the last they cast anchor in the bay of Eldamar, and the Teleri saw the coming of that ship out of the east, and they were amazed, gazing from afar upon the light of the Silmaril, and it was very great. Then Íarindéil, first of living men, landed on the immortal shores. And he spoke there to Elwing and to those that were with him, and they were 3 mariners who had sailed all the seas beside him. Falathar, Erelont, and Erandir were their names. And Íarindéil said to them, Here none but myself shall set foot, lest you fall under the wrath of the Valar. But that peril I will take on myself alone, for the sake of the 2 kindreds. But Elwing answered, Then would our paths be sundered forever. But all thy perils I will take on myself also. And she leapt into the white foam and ran towards him. But Íarindéil was sorrowful, for he feared the anger of the lords of the west upon any of Middle-earth that should dare to pass the leaguer of Aman. And there they bade farewell to the companions of their voyage, and were taken from them forever. Then Íarindéil said to Elwing, Await me here, for one only may bring the message that it is my fate to bear. And he went up alone into the land, and came into the Calakiria, and it seemed to him empty and silent. For even as Morgoth and Ungoliant came in ages past, so now Íarindéil had come at a time of festival, and well-nigh all the elven folk were gone to Valimar, or were gathered in the halls of Manwë upon Tani Quetil, and few were left to keep watch upon the walls of Tirion. But some there were who saw him from afar, and the great light that he bore, and they went in haste to Valimar. But Íarindéil climbed the green hill of Tuna, and found it bare, and he entered into the streets of Tirion, and they were empty, and his heart was heavy, for he feared that some evil had come even to the blessed realm. He walked in the deserted ways of Tirion, and the dust upon his raiment and his shoes was a dust of diamonds, and he shone and glistened as he climbed the long white stairs. And he called aloud in many tongues, both of elves and men, but there were none to answer him. Therefore he turned back at last towards the sea. But even as he took the shoreward road, one stood upon the hill and called to him in a great voice, crying, Hail, Íarindéil! of mariners most renowned, the looked-for that cometh at unawares, the longed-for that cometh beyond hope. Hail, Íarindéil, bearer of light before the sun and moon, splendor of the children of earth, star in the darkness, jewel in the sunset, radiant in the morning. That voice was the voice of Eonwe, herald of Manwe, and he came from Valimar, and summoned Íarindéil to come before the powers of Arda. And Íarindéil went into Valinor, and to the halls of Valimar, and never again set foot upon the lands of men. Then the Valar took counsel together, and they summoned Ulmo from the deeps of the sea. And Íarindéil stood before their faces, and delivered the errand of the two kindreds. Pardon he asked for the Noldor, and pity for their great sorrows, and mercy upon men and elves, and succor in their need, and his prayer was granted. It is told among the elves that after Íarindéil had departed, seeking Elwing his wife, Mandos spoke concerning his fate, and he said, "Shall mortal man step living upon the undying lands and yet live?" But Ulmo said, "For this he was born into the world, and say unto me, whether is he Íarindéil Tuor, son of the line of Hador, or the son of Idril, Turgon's daughter of the elven house of Finwë?" And Mandos answered, "Equally the Noldor, who went willfully into exile, may not return hither." But when all was spoken, Manwë gave judgment, and he said, "In this matter the power of doom is given to me. The peril that he ventured for love of the two kindreds shall not fall upon Íarindéil, nor shall it fall upon Elwing his wife, who entered into peril for love of him. But they shall not walk again ever among elves or men in the outer lands, and this is my decree concerning them. To Íarindéil and to Elwing and to their sons shall be given leave each to choose freely to which kindred their fates shall be joined, and under which kindred they shall be judged." Now when Íarindéil was long time gone, Elwing became lonely and afraid, and wandering by the margin of the sea she came near to Alqualande, where lay the Telerin fleets. And there Íarindéil returning found her at the haven of the swans. But ere long they were summoned to Valimar, and there the decree of the elder king was declared to them. Then Íarindéil said to Elwing, "Choose thou, for now I am weary of the world." And Elwing chose to be judged among the firstborn children of Ilúvatar, because of Lúthien, and for her sake Íarindéil chose alike, though his heart was rather with the kindred of men and the people of his father. But they took Vingilot and hallowed it, and bore it away through Valinor to the uttermost rim of the world, and there it passed through the door of night, and was lifted up even into the oceans of heaven. Now fair and marvelous was that vessel made, and it was filled with a wavering flame, pure and bright. And Íarindéil the mariner sat at the helm, glistening with dust of elven gems, and the Silmaril was bound upon his brow. Far he journeyed in that ship, even into the starless voids. But most often was he seen at morning or at evening, glimmering in sunrise or sunset, as he came back to Valinor from voyages beyond the confines of the world. Yet it is said that Morgoth looked not for the assault that came upon him from the west, for so great was his pride become, that he deemed that none would ever again come with open war against him. Moreover, he thought that he had forever estranged the Noldor from the lords of the west, and that content in their blissful realm, the Valar would heed no more his kingdom in the world without. For to him that is pitiless, the deeds of pity are ever strange and beyond reckoning. But the host of the Valar prepared for battle, and beneath their white banners marched the Vanyar, the people of Ingwe, and those also of the Noldor who never departed from Valinor, whose leader was Finarfin, the son of Finwë. Few of the Teleri were willing to go forth to war, for they remembered the slaying at the Swan Haven and the rape of their ships. Of the march of the host of the Valar to the north of Middle-earth, little is said in any tale, for among them went none of those elves who had dwelt and suffered in the hitherlands, and who made the histories of those days that still are known. And tidings of these things they only learned long afterwards from their kinsfolk in Aman. But at the last, the might of Valinor came up out of the west, and the challenge of the trumpets of Eonwe filled the sky, and Beleriand was ablaze with the glory of their arms. For the host of the Valar were arrayed in forms young and fair and terrible, and the mountains rang beneath their feet. The meeting of the hosts of the west and of the north is named the Great Battle and the War of Wrath. There was marshalled the whole power of the throne of Morgoth, and it had become great beyond count, so that Anfauglith could not contain it, and all the north was aflame with war. But it availed him not. The Balrogs were destroyed, save some few that fled and hid themselves in caverns inaccessible at the roots of the earth. And the uncounted legions of the orcs perished like straw in a great fire, or were swept like shriveled leaves before a burning wind. Few remained to trouble the world for long years after. Then, seeing that his hosts were overthrown and his power dispersed, Morgoth quailed, and he dared not come forth himself. But he loosed upon his foes the last desperate assault that he had prepared, and out of the pits of Angband there issued the winged dragons that had not before been seen. And so sudden and ruinous was the onset of that dreadful fleet that the hosts of the Valar were driven back, for the coming of the dragons was with great thunder and lightning and a tempest of fire. But Eärendil came, shining with white flame, and about Vingilot were gathered all the great birds of heaven, and Thorondor was their captain, and there was battle in the air all the day and through a dark night of doubt. Before the rising of the sun, Eärendil slew Ancalagan the Black, the mightiest of the dragon host, and cast him from the sky. And he fell upon the towers of Thangorodrim, and they were broken in his ruin. Then the sun rose, and the host of the Valar prevailed, and well nigh all the dragons were destroyed, and all the pits of Morgoth were broken and unroofed, and the might of the Valar descended into the deeps of the earth. There Morgoth stood at last at bay, and yet unvaliant. He fled into the deepest of his mines, and sued for peace and pardon. But his feet were hewn from under him, and he was hurled upon his face. Then he was bound with the chain Angainor, which he had worn aforetime, and his iron crown they beat into a collar for his neck, and his head was bowed upon his knees, and the 2 Silmarils which remained to Morgoth were taken from his crown, and they shone unsullied beneath the sky, and Eonwe took them and guarded them. Thus an end was made of the power of Angband in the north, and the evil realm was brought to naught.